Well, Saul Griffith is an engineer and entrepreneur who specialises in renewable energy. He's launched numerous tech companies in the US and also written 3 books on renewables, one of which is simply called Electrify. He's also founded an organisation called Rewiring Australia to advocate to the switch to electricity and away from fossil fuels. And I spoke to him a little earlier this week.
I work on electrification globally, and the reality is Australia has the easiest path to electrify its economy of probably any economy, and we have the most benefit to gain from it because it will lower our cost of living and lower our cost of energy.
So you know that the government has said that gas is a transitional material. I know also that you would be against that. You sat, in fact, on a panel with the boss of the APA Group, Australia's biggest gas pipeline company, just a week or so ago. Just explain how Australia gets gas or fossil fuels out of our economy, out of our energy economy, without necessarily having blackouts or having significant price spikes.
You know, gas might have been a transition fuel in the 1990s, but that ship has sailed. Now we can electrify with solar, with batteries, with wind. You know, I do this work internationally. I even have a fusion startup in my office in San Francisco, so there's going to be some nuclear in the mix. I might not recommend it for Australia for cost reasons, but these are the ways we electrify. There's going to be such prolific batteries. For example, I own an electric ute that has a 132 kilowatt hour battery that could power my house for 4 days. This is underappreciated by a lot of people, including our energy regulators, just how many assets like that ute will be out there when we have an all-electric Australia. To emphasise the benefits of it, if I'm powering that ute off my rooftop solar, it's about 2 cents a kilometre to drive it. If it was running on diesel, it would cost me 25 cents a kilometre. So that emphasises Australia's opportunity. If we're not importing foreign oil and we're using our own sunshine to run our cars, we're going to save enormously.
Okay, so I get that. And I'm interested in your car in particular, because one question I was going to ask you is about the step change that's needed in technology to be able to bring the storage. It's all very well to have the rooftop solar, it's all very well to have the wind power and the big solar farms, but you've got to be able to store it for the times when there are gaps in those energy sources. So where in the future do you imagine battery technology goes to?
Oh, the future is already here. I took delivery yesterday of batteries that I ordered, and they were costing me about $190 per kilowatt hour. That battery effectively per cycle is going to cost me 4 or 5 cents per kilowatt hour. If I add that to my rooftop solar, that's 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week electricity at about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And anyone who looks at their electricity bill knows that that's lower. So I'm buying that battery wholesale. I'm buying it direct from the manufacturer, but those prices will eventually come to the consumer in Australia. You know, 10 years ago, if I told you rooftop solar was going to be really cheap, you would be sceptical. Now everyone in Australia believes it, regardless of their political orientation. The same thing is happening to batteries. The global industry is going to scale, and the prices are dropping. So it's just going to happen whether we like it or not, and we may as well model our future on where the ball is going, not on where it's been. So there's still a lot of fear stories that the batteries won't arrive, they'll be too expensive, the cars won't go far enough. The next generation of batteries will make the cars go twice as far. Given that they already do 300 or 400 kilometres, that means they'll do 600 or 700 kilometres. That's really competitive, and we should be going to where the ball is and not working out of fear. Because like I said, Australia, we win the most if we make this our national plan.
Okay, so because certainly AEMO this week, when they talked about the roadmap, did talk about rooftop solar, and certainly it also indicated that it can already produce around 30% of the electricity that's in our national grid, in the East Coast grid. But the one thing I want to go to you about is the batteries for industry, whether there's significant storage and large enough storage to be able to maintain, you know, an aluminium refining industry, a steel industry in the future, whether these are also battery technology is big enough on a scale large enough to make certain that you can continue to have electricity heavy industries.
Mate, now you're talking my language. You probably don't know that I'm actually a metallurgist, and my first job was working in a steel mill in Newcastle. And actually one of my mates is running a company called Form Energy. They're actually using iron as a battery. and a grid-scale battery to do exactly what you want. You can make a very cheap battery out of iron. It's actually a 100-year-old technology called the Edison cell. And that same company is developing a process that will make green iron from pure electricity at room temperature without any hydrogen, without any gas, and that is the way that we will make steel cheaper in the future rather than more expensive, because they'll be able to run that process during the periods of the day and the periods of the year when renewables are incredibly cheap, and we'll be able to convert Australian iron ore into iron here domestically. Instead of exporting cheap red dirt, we'll export much higher value-added steel, because Australia has really, like I said, the easiest path in the world, not just to run our utes on cheap sunshine, but because we can produce way more renewables than we need in our domestic economy, we'll be able to export energy-intensive products like steel to the world, and those are the industries for the future. And we shouldn't fear that. We should really embrace that and direct our government policy towards it.
See, when I opened this story, I talked about the rewiring of Australia that's needed, the 10,000 kilometres of poles and wires that are required to be able to transmit this renewable energy around the country. What you're sort of talking about, though, is whether the storage is closer to home and closer to industry, whether that is the future, as distinct from trying to go across sensitive farming land that might cause the resistance from rural communities.
Right. I think there's a few things to say about this. And one is, I think people should be fairly paid if they're going to have the transmission lines on their property, and that would be a way to change the conversation and incentivise people. I know in Queensland, the Copper String project has good social licence precisely because it's actually including the communities in the economic upside. But the other thing to say is, if you broke down the price of electricity that you get at your house, the majority of that is the cost of the transmission and the distribution lines. And so if you're designing a lowest cost energy system for Australia, you'd maximise the solar on our roofs. We've got about 35% of our roofs with it now. We could easily go to 80, and those systems will get bigger and bigger because it continues to get cheaper and cheaper. But the other thing you'd do is you'd maximise the renewables in your community. Think about solar on the rooftop at Bunnings, solar on the car park at Woolies. That will also bring cheaper energy than the energy generated, at a centralised facility and trucked thousands of kilometres. You also need to do some of that, but if we really planned the system thinking about the whole thing, we'd probably get away with a few less of those transmission lines. And it actually speaks to some of the challenges. AEMO was literally designed to protect the generating assets that we have, and when it thinks about this, it sort of models the wholesale cost of generating electricity. It doesn't model the cost of getting it all the way to the consumer. And if you think about getting it all the way to the customer, where the majority of the cost of the electricity is moving it, then you'd come up with slightly different answers on how we do the transmission and where we put that solar and where we put that wind.
The one thing, and I know you're an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur in many ways, that I get the sense of is that there are opportunities, business opportunities, that will come out of this energy transition in all sorts of ways. To tie a couple of ideas together here, there's a lot of tariffs going around the world, like America not importing cheap Chinese electric cars and cheap Chinese solar cells. The reality is that 15 years ago, China invested in automating its manufacturing, in bringing robots into its manufacturing, and they wanted to dominate the energy industries of the future because they don't have a lot of domestic oil or a lot of domestic gas, and they don't really want to buy it from anyone. So they went all in on solar and batteries and electric vehicles, and that's why they produce something like 85% of the world's solar, 80% of the world's batteries, and now they're the most competitive electric vehicles in the world. Because they were not distracted with a gas transition, which is what unfortunately America did and what Australia did, they are honestly 15 years ahead of us. I'm just hoping that we don't miss the next business opportunities by continuing to slow roll this and let the gas industry tell us lies about the gas transition. We don't need it. It's going to slow us down. And if we do it, it's going to harm the nation economically because we won't be building the industries of the future. We'll be building the industries of the past. Saul Griffith, good to have you in the program today. Many thanks for your time.
Cheers, mate.